If you're thinking about learning guitar or even just buying another one to add to your collection, you should probably know the difference between acoustic guitar, electric guitar, and what we call classical guitar. So let's break down real quick what each of those kinds of guitars are, what makes them unique, and why you might want to pick one over the other. Starting here with the steel string acoustic guitar. It's called a steel string acoustic guitar because of exactly that. We have steel strings here on the guitar. Steel strings are thicker and hold more tension, which means steel string acoustic guitars are a little bit more difficult to press down. They're also a little bit more difficult to do things like bends, and pushing around the string in general is a little more painful. And yet, this is probably the most popular type of guitar around. And you might ask, why is that? Well, it's because the sound that a steel string acoustic guitar produces is the sound you're most familiar with. Most popular music from most decades is played on the acoustic guitar. It creates sound and volume by having a giant body cavity where the sound can resonate and come out with a giant hole in the center. And because it creates all of its power and sound on its own, you're able to take it and it's very portable to move around in different locations. Out of the three options of guitars today, the steel string acoustic is by far the loudest on its own, which means that solo performers or people that want to pick up the guitar without needing anything extra, no extra cables or amplifiers or anything like that, are often drawn to the steel string acoustic. And because it's so iconic, beginners often make this their first time guitar, maybe not knowing that it's a little bit more difficult to play than the other two. The other big things you should be looking out for as we go through the other two kinds of guitars is the size of the instrument itself and the comfortability with things like the neck profile where your hands go. And the steel string acoustic is one of the bigger guitars, which can make it a little bit more uncomfortable, especially for smaller players. But I'll make a note that the style that I'm holding right now is called a dreadnought body style, which is the standard full-size acoustic guitar, but they make a lot of other small body and 3/4 size guitars that you could play if you're worried about the size but still want the sound of an acoustic guitar. The width of the neck is slightly larger than an electric guitar, but slightly smaller than a classical guitar, which makes it a nice middle ground in terms of stretching and finger placement. So most people should be able, especially with the right body size of guitar, to play this with no problem. Expect some first-time difficulties in making this sound good, but if you put just a little bit more hard work in than you would pressing down the strings on the other guitars, you can create an absolutely iconic sound. Classical guitar might look a lot like the steel string acoustic guitar, but there's a couple of big things that set it apart. And the first thing you might notice is that it uses plastic strings with silver wound strings on the top three rather than straight metal strings all the way down. And the idea of nylon or plastic strings appeals to a lot of people because they hurt a lot less. They're softer, they're easier to press down, they're easier on your fingers, and as a consequence of being a softer material, they also sound softer and produce less volume. And a lot of time the goal of the classical guitar is not to produce a huge amount of volume like an acoustic guitar might, and so you often drop the guitar pick and start using your fingers instead to create a much quieter but smoother sound. This is a full-size classical guitar, but you also might notice that it's a little bit smaller and even a little bit less wide than the steel string acoustic guitar, which can make them a little bit more comfortable depending on how you're playing it. You see, the flip side of the classical guitar is that it's often meant to be played at this angle like a classical guitar player might. Your hand is supposed to rest over the top. Technically, you're supposed to have a footstool to raise this left leg, and everything is at this 45-degree angle to put you in the best position for fingerstyle. People train for years to get perfect tone and technique on the classical guitar, growing out their nails on the right hand, but not on the left hand, which always freaked me out a little bit, I'll be honest. Holding their guitar in perfect position, which makes it a little bit more difficult to play if you're trying to achieve that perfect classical style. But it's not like you can't put it on your other leg just like the other types of guitar and play it in a more modern way. Just try to get used to the idea that you will never create exactly the same types of sounds that you hear in a lot of popular songs that use the guitar. And generally, the genres played on this kind of guitar are soft indie folk, classical music, or maybe some type of Spanish music. There's one other important detail, which is that while the body is a little bit smaller, the neck position on a classical is a little bit wider than the other two guitars. It means that making stretches can actually be a little bit more difficult on this guitar, and getting your hand to wrap around the whole thing can be just a little bit more annoying. So your trade-off here is easier to play strings that are softer and not as harsh on your hands, but at the same time, you're going to create a softer sound, and you're going to sacrifice a little bit of the dexterity and width that you have on some of those smaller neck instruments. And last but not least, the electric guitar. As you can see, the electric guitar is a whole different thing. Immediately and visually, it's a lot more distinct than the other guitars, which both look like brown pieces of wood. And it's because the whole idea of the electric guitar is that we generate sound using these magnetic pickups here that send out the signal to an amplifier to create sound, which means that the actual wood and body around the guitar means a whole lot less. So you can have incredibly funky shapes, sizes, and colors with electric guitars, including guitars that have no body at all, bodies with weird V-like shapes, bodies with zigzags, weird hot pink color, and all sorts of possibly demonic things, which I think is really cool because that means that you can get a very personalized and stylized electric guitar. If you're somebody that likes a really stylized guitar experience, the electric guitar is by far the most customizable and styled. Because their bodies can be whatever you want, they're often extremely thin and very light and easy to carry, although there are some very heavy electric guitars out there because the wood is solid and not hollow like an acoustic. But in general, with electric guitars, you can get very good sounding electrics for a much cheaper price than you can with acoustic guitars. Because remember, the wood means a whole lot less, and it's really just up to a few hardware decisions to make an electric guitar sound good. Because of their ultra slim profile, they use thinner strings that have a lot less tension than a steel string acoustic and are a lot easier to press down. It's because of this reason that I mention to people, if they want to get that modern guitar sound that's not soft like a nylon, but they still want the easiest experience possible for their first time guitar, absolutely an electric is the way to go. Their extremely light and lower tension strings allow for bigger bends and vibrato, creating a lot more of a dynamic sound, but of course losing a little bit of that earthy woodsiness that you get out of an acoustic steel string guitar. Because the sound is sent to a box for processing rather than just coming out of the guitar itself, you can put any number of effects and sound types on an electric guitar. You can make it sound like I am right now, which is a rock sound guitar with distortion, or you can make an electric guitar sound like an acoustic guitar, make an electric guitar sound like a synthesizer, or sound like it's ringing out in a giant hallway. There's pretty much no limit to the ways that you can make an electric guitar sound, which, like I said before, makes it a very, very flexible guitar type. But the huge downside of the electric guitar is that without the amp, it makes pretty much no noise on its own. Have to have a box or a headphone amplifier or something along with a cable to bring with you for the electric guitar to produce really any noise at all. Makes it really difficult to travel with because you're going to have to bring a bunch of other things along with. Also makes it slightly more expensive. You can get the guitars for cheaper and get a better quality, but you are also going to have to buy an amp and a cable, sometimes even batteries if they have active pickups. So there's a little bit more costs associated with electric guitar. Have a lot more control with things like volume and tone built into your guitar, which of course you don't get on an acoustic or a nylon guitar. But I will mention that they make acoustic electric hybrids. That's acoustic guitars that have an electronic pickup built into the guitar so you can have some of the features of electric play, including being able to plug it into an amplifier to make really loud sounds and adding a volume knob for a nice touch. At the end of the day, I think you should try to pick the guitar that's best suited for you and your tastes. In my opinion, you shouldn't pick it based on how easy it is, but rather the types of sounds that you want to get out of your guitar playing, which you can trace back to the music that you listen to and like to hear. If you like effects-driven sounds, if you like shoegaze music, or you like rock and metal music with heavy distortion, or maybe really ethereal ambient sounds, then the electric guitar is definitely the right choice for you. If you like soft, warm, and mellow sounds, gentle fingerstyle, and beautiful soundscapes, then maybe the classical guitar is the one for you. If you love the bright strummed sounds of metal strings in popular music, or the idea of strumming chords and singing along, the acoustic guitar with the steel string is probably the one that you're going to gravitate toward. Know what your preference is in the comment sections below. I'm curious to see where everybody stands. Do you prefer the electric or the acoustic or the classical guitar? And tell me why. If you guys like this video, you can show me some support by joining me for free on my Patreon or by listening to my original music that I make all by myself. It's up on Spotify right now with the links in my profile. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you for the next one.